A machine that won't start can sit dead on site for a week, and the bill grows the deeper you dig. Everyone reaches for the same expensive part, drops thousands on it, and sometimes it still won't run. That was never the bottom. In part 1, the gauge was already hinting at it. So we open it in order, cheapest first. Injectors, then a compression test. You don't condemn the block till everything cheaper's ruled out. The big pump is $3,000, but if the wear is inside the engine itself, you're not swapping a part, you're rebuilding it. That's 5 figures. That's the bottom nobody wants to reach. First out, the injectors. You can't just reach in and grab an injector. The top of the engine's buried. Hoses, tubes, a fan guard in the way. The intake plumbing lifts off as one piece. Mark the ends before you pull them, or you'll burn an hour guessing which way each one faced. The fan guard comes off next. That's what opens up the number 3 and 4 cylinder tops. And the moment those bores are open, one dropped bolt is all it takes. It drops in, the piston slams up, and you've scored the cylinder you came to save. The rebuild, not the repair. So it's rags in every opening, clean hands, slow moves. The top's clear now. Next, the injector itself. With the top cleared, the injector's finally in reach. First, the rocker gear and the inlet connectors come off. That's the only way down to it. Then 2 bolts release the clamp. You never pry it. Years of carbon can seize it in the bore, so a special puller draws it straight up. Lever it, and you crack the tip. Each injector is $300 to $1,000, times 6, still the cheapest thing on this list. One speck of grit down that open hole, and the new one's scrap before it fires, so the bore stays capped. But a fresh injector that still won't fix a hard start means the leak's mechanical. First place to look is the valves. That's next. To reach the valves, one flat cover is all that's in the way. The head cover unbolts and lifts straight off. The whole valve train laid bare, rockers and springs, nothing hidden. And here's the part an owner likes. Nothing under this cover costs a part. No puller, no components, just labor and a feeler gauge. But you touch nothing yet. The cover's off, the train is open, and before a single valve gets measured, the engine has to be turned to one exact position. That's next. Now the valves are exposed, but you don't dare bump the starter for this. On top of the starting motor, there's a plug. Pull it, and it opens straight onto the flywheel teeth underneath. A barring gear threads into that hole and bites those teeth, so a wrench on it rolls the crankshaft a few degrees at a time. Slow, controlled, by hand. That's the only way to creep up on an exact spot without blowing past it. Hit the starter instead, and you'll fly right by the mark you need. And finding that mark is next. You've got a wrench on the engine now, but turning it means nothing until you know where to stop. Down on the crank pulley there's a single machined line, the timing mark. Beside it, bolted to the block, a fixed pointer that never moves. You bar it over slowly until that line sits dead under the pointer. Not near, dead under. That one alignment puts number 1 piston on its exact spot and locks the engine to a position you can trust. Land it a hair off, and every clearance you measure after is quietly wrong, and you'd never know. Lined up and locked. Now, something has to tell you which valves you're even allowed to set here. That's next. Here's the trap the chart is warning you about. At this one position, you cannot set all 6 cylinders, only some. With number 1 at compression, the valves glowing red are the ones fully closed, seated hard against their seats. Those are the only ones safe to touch right now. The gray ones still have their cam lobe pushing on them. Slide a gauge under those and you'll read a gap that isn't real and set them dead wrong. So you do every red valve first. Then you bar the crank one full turn, 360, and the gray ones swing closed and light up red. 2 positions and every valve gets its shot. Now the gauge finally earns its keep. That's next. Now the feeler gauge finally goes to work. It slides into the gap between the rocker and the crosshead, and it should pull through with light drag. Not loose, not pinched. Too loose and the valve never opens fully. Too tight and it never fully seats. Either way, it leaks and the machine fights you every cold start. Feel a wrong gap? Crack the lock nut. Turn the adjustment screw until the drag feels right. Then, hold that screw dead still and torque the lock nut to 18 foot-pounds. Let it creep while you tighten, and the setting's gone. Do all 6, both positions, then pull the barring gear back out. If every clearance came out clean and it still cranks weak, the valves aren't your problem, which means it's deeper. That's next. Injectors clean, valves set, and it still cranks weak. Before you tear the whole engine down for what's underneath, one part can still starve it just as badly. The pump that feeds the entire system. And this is the one nobody wants to reach. The priciest single fix in the fuel system. $3,000 by the time it's back on. To get it out, every fuel line at the pump comes off first. 2 filter hoses, the return line, each on a quick connect with a lock you press, not pry. The moment a line's free, it's capped. This deep in, a speck of dirt in the pump is a second repair bill. Line's off, but the pump's still tied in below. That's next. The soft hoses are off, but the pump's still fed from 2 more lines you can't just yank. Up top, the fuel supply hose runs into the pump. That one comes off first, at the connector where it threads in. Below it sits the bellows, a mesh-wrapped line that flexes with the engine. It comes off after. Pull it too early, and you're fighting the supply fitting blind in a spot you can barely see. Same rule as before. Every fitting you crack gets capped before you move on. Down here, clean isn't a habit, it's the whole job. Supply side's clear now. What's left holding pressure is the hard steel line, and that one doesn't just unclip. That's next. Now the line that actually matters, the hard steel pipe carrying fuel at rail pressure. This isn't a hose you unclip, it's a rigid, high-pressure pipe, and it threads into the pump through a fitting torqued down tight. Crack the connector loose, then work the pipe free without bending it. Kink a high-pressure line, and it's scrap. You don't straighten one and trust it again. 2 things get capped the second they part, the pump port and the pipe end. At this pressure, a single grain of grit becomes a scratch, and a scratch becomes a leak. That's the last line off the pump. What's holding it to the engine now is steel and bolts, clamps first. That's next. The pipe's loose at the pump, but it's still pinned to the block by 2 clamps along its run. Those clamps aren't decoration. A high-pressure line vibrates every second the engine runs, and unsupported, it work hardens and cracks. That's why it's braced twice. Undo both clamp bolts, then lift the pipe away clean. No prying, no bending it past the clamps. Cap the ends the instant they're free. Same rule, all the way down. On the way back, those clamp bolts go to 18 foot-pounds. Loose clamps let it buzz itself to failure. That's every line and bracket off the pump. What's left is 3 nuts and the pump itself. That's next. Before those 3 nuts, The return side has to come off first. Low-pressure fuel doesn't only feed the pump, it drains back out through a return tube, a soft hose, and a fuel block bolted along here. They come off in order: tube, hose, block, and the bracket holding them. Tucked in is the bellows, a flexible line that has to point a certain way going back. Aim its slit out and down. Point it up or in, and any fuel that ever weeps runs onto a hot engine. That's not a leak, that's a fire. Now the pump's free of every line. 3 nuts, and it's out. That's next. Every line's off. Now the pump itself. 3 nuts hold the whole assembly to the gear case. That's all that's left. And here's the part that saves you. The pump comes off in one piece, drive gear and all. No timing to hold, no marks to line up. Pull the nuts and it lifts straight out with the gear still on it. That's why you didn't need to touch the timing gears to get here. The gear rides off with the pump and drops right back on the same way. Nuts out, pump out. The single most expensive part in this whole video is now in your hands. That's next. Here it is, the priciest single fix in the whole fuel system, out on the bench. This pump doesn't get bolted back on as is. It gets rebuilt and recalibrated on a test bench, then torqued down at 18 foot-pounds. $3,000 all in. And here's the gut punch. You can do all of this. New injectors, valve set, this pump rebuilt, and the machine can still crank weak. Because a pump only pushes fuel. It can't fix an engine that no longer holds compression. If the fresh pump doesn't cure it, the fuel system is cleared, and the problem was never up here. It's down in the cylinders. That's next. New pump on, and it still cranks weak. That clears the whole fuel system. The fault has to be mechanical now. There's one test left that reads the engine itself, and it goes in where an injector used to sit. So one injector comes back out. Pull the fuel tube in its inlet connector first. Then lift only the exhaust side rocker. The intake side can stay put. Draw the injector straight up with the puller, and you're left with a clean threaded hole running straight down onto the piston. That hole is a window into the cylinder. And next, a gauge screws into it to finally read what the block is doing. That's next. An adapter threads into that empty injector hole, and a compression gauge screws onto it. But the reading only counts if you set it up right. The oil has to be warm, 40 to 60 degrees, and the gasket on the adapter is not optional. Skip it, and the number leaks away low. Bar the engine over and watch the needle. A healthy cylinder slams up to full pressure and holds. Here's the tell. If one cylinder is low, that's a valve or a head. But if every cylinder reads low, evenly, the rings and liners are worn, all 6. That's not a part you swap. That's the bottom of this whole video. That's next. Every cylinder read low, evenly. So this is the bottom nobody wanted. The rocker gear and push rods come off, then the head itself. 26 bolts, 75 kilos of iron. This one needs lifting gear, not muscle. Lift it, and there they are, the rings and liners, worn past sealing. New injectors couldn't fix it. A rebuilt pump couldn't fix it, because none of them was ever the problem. This is the repair that runs into 5 figures, the one everyone was hoping to avoid from the very first crank. So the real lesson is the order. Test cheap, rule things out, and never tear this far down on a guess. Do it backwards and you'll spend $3,000 on a pump to fix a worn-out block. If this saved you one wrong part, like it, comment where you're stuck, share it with your crew, and subscribe. The next teardown's already coming.